So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us at the Chak Museum, particularly on not the nicest afternoon weather-wise as well. It's my great privilege to welcome you and to introduce our presenter this afternoon. But before I do that, I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are meeting today on Gadigal land, land belonging to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And the Chak Museum and the University of Sydney are committed to paying our respects to the traditional custodians of these lands, skies and waterways, and acknowledging and paying our respect to the elders past and present. We've tried to embed as much Gadigal knowledge as possible into this building, and we wish to do more going forward. One of the other things that the Chak Museum is committed to is to telling through our collections and through our stories more and more diverse stories and more engagement with communities than we've ever been able to do in the past. And recognising the important role of queer involvement with the University of Sydney with this collection is one step towards that. So it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker this afternoon and to welcome Tuan back, who joined us last year for our International Museums Day panel as well. Tuan Nguyen is an Assistant Curator at the Powerhouse Museum here in Sydney. He graduated from the University of Sydney's Heritage and Museum, had the wrong way around, Museums and Heritage Studies program, and of course also gained a doctorate from here at the University of Sydney as well. Tuan's curatorial practice is very much guided by a concern to reflect diverse social and community histories, a desire to create powerful experiences and to affect change. And we're seeing his work in action already with some of the exhibitions that he's been involved in at the Powerhouse, including the Zampatti Powerhouse exhibition last year, and in particular, to coincide with WorldPride, the Absolutely Queer exhibition, which opened in February at the Powerhouse and is on until the end of the year. So with all of the events of WorldPride having now taken place and been completed, we thought it would be a good time to reflect, after the hangover has passed, a good time to stop and reflect about the way that cultural institutions have been engaging with telling queer communities' stories. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Tuan to the lectern. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Craig. I currently don't have a hangover. Let's put that on the record. Okay, let's just check these slides. Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Tuan Nguyen, and I'm an Assistant Curator at the Powerhouse, as you heard from Craig. I would also like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, as well as looking at the broad terrain of Mardi Gras and WorldPride this year. I'll be mentioning forms of Indigenous acknowledgement that were embedded in the program. So my pronouns are he, him, and I bring that up at this point because that's my first question for everyone today. Can we imagine a future where stating one's pronouns at the beginning of a conversation doesn't seem so unusual? I may be read as male, and it might seem obvious that my pronouns are he, him, but these seemingly obvious rules that we apply to others don't apply to everyone, namely those whose gender is non-binary. Can we imagine a future where stating one's pronouns is as embedded as an acknowledgement of country is today? So, in this presentation, I'll be reflecting on Mardi Gras and WorldPride this year, which started on the 17th of February and ended on the 5th of this month. So I'm still processing and recovering from this time. It's been a really incredible and intense period for me. At no other point in my career, perhaps ever again, has there been such an alignment between the personal, the political, and the professional. In some ways, I'm simply throwing open my diary and giving you a glimpse into the exhibitions, events, and parties that I went to. And yes, I went to everything on this slide in 3 weeks, documenting with thousands of photos as I went. This was in addition to partying, endless meetups with friends, old and new, exhibition openings, and that little thing called work. So needless to say, I'm tired, but I'm also deliriously happy and have built an incredible archive of connections and documentation that will feed into my work as a curator. So first of all, what happened? Well, this year we had Mardi Gras happen concurrently with WorldPride. So for Sydney-siders in the room, I probably don't need to explain what Mardi Gras is. It's one of the largest pride festivals in the world that started in 1978 as a party come protest. It has since grown to have an incredible attendance of around 500,000 people at the parade alone. These are figures from 2019. The festival goes on for several weeks in February, March, and includes events such as Fair Day and culminates in the Mardi Gras Parade. WorldPride, on the other hand, is a pride event that is hosted in a different city, selected by the Interpride organization, mostly every 2 years. It started off in Rome in 2000 and has been hosted in Jerusalem, London, Toronto, Madrid, New York City, Copenhagen, and now Sydney. It tends to result in the largest queer festival in the world for that year. So when the Sydney Gay and Lesbian Mardi Gras and WorldPride were combined this year, there were great expectations around attendance. However, it's quite interesting that the numbers were revised downwards. So I've seen figures for over 1 million for the projected audience draw for the festival, which was billed as the largest event since the 2000 Olympics. The current arts minister, Ben Franklin, called it, quote, a rainbow-coloured shot in the arm for Sydney. However, the figure that is given by the Sydney WorldPride organisation itself is 500,000, which includes 100,000 visitors, which is basically the size of a large pre-pandemic Mardi Gras. And this also accords with my own experience of the festival. It felt like Mardi Gras before COVID-19. I don't think anyone was disappointed by the attendance, given that the world is still experiencing and recovering from COVID. But I suspect that the amazing program of over 300 events was designed to cater for more people. So it was impossible not to notice that WorldPride was on. I don't think anyone in the room didn't notice the rainbows that were everywhere. Although a lot of us in this room think a lot about museums and galleries, and we go to many exhibitions, many people do not. But we all go on social media, we all go down the street, and most of us shop in supermarkets. So let's look at some examples. These are my local shops in Lane Cove. The Coles has rainbow bunting, and the council has signed up to the Rainbow City program, placing rainbows on the pedestrian mall. I'm sure you've encountered many local examples yourself. It goes to show the widespread diffusion and visibility of pride. Whether you go down Oxford Street or get some milk at your local shops, rainbows were everywhere. Some of these rainbows were produced under the Rainbow City program organised by WorldPride, an initiative of 45 rainbows across the city, representing 45 years of Mardi Gras. I picked out just a few that shows the great reach of the program in sometimes unlikely places, and which also goes to show the broad corporate support. There was the now iconic Progress Shark at the Australian Museum, large rainbow artworks at Barangaroo, Hurstfield, Coogee, the airport, Westfield, Sydney, and on the side of the Scenic Skyway in Katoomba. So here we see the rainbows on the Scenic Skyway in the Blue Mountains and banners at the Sydney Jewish Museum. Notice the flag on the left, which you might have seen around, in addition to the rainbow flag, which was created in 1978. There are additional stripes which were added into 2018. The black and brown to represent people of colour, and the light blue and pink representing trans and non-binary people. There have been constant negotiations since LGBTQIA plus people began to identify themselves in identity and coalition-based ways for the boundaries of the community to be expanded or even contracted. This usually happens in the direction of expansion, of course, and the progress flag is another iteration of that trend. So let's talk about Progress Shark for the moment. There's a blockbuster exhibition called Sharks at the Australian Museum, which has been incredibly successful. As part of Rainbow City, the Australian Museum commissioned the Sydney artist George Buchanan to dress the model of the great white shark in a progress flag. It's rather head-scratching that this has become the unofficial mascot of WorldPride. I think it's continuing in the Australian tradition of big things, and come to think of it, aren't big things just a little bit camp? Progress Shark has garnered some great and colourful headlines, including Sydney's absurd and wonderful Progress Shark becomes WorldPride icon. Progress Shark, a 32-foot model of a great white wearing a rainbow leotard, is the breakout star of WorldPride in Sydney, Australia. Australia's LGBTQ+ statue progress flag is a gay icon we didn't know we needed. And my favourite, Progress Shark is attacked by Mark Latham as garbage. Can you think of a better ringing endorsement for a queer icon than to have Mark Latham singling you out? But thankfully, because of Instagram, we can hear from Progress Shark themselves. So this video has been played 53,000 times, and I love it. Okay, so this is where the presentation gets a bit darker because WorldPride for me, and for queer and especially trans people, is not all sunshines and rainbows. I really only need to outline my own experience and that of my close friends during the festival to demonstrate that not all Sydney celebrated WorldPride. So instead of pride and joy, what we're talking about is anger and hate, and on the other side, pain and fear. I was in Arncliffe recently in an outfit very similar to this. This is me at this year's Fair Day, by the way. I look great. A man yelled from a burger joint, "No faggots," in Arncliffe, and held up his thong as a threat. I was with two other people at the time, but I did feel fearful. I just wanted to get out of there, and I didn't want any confrontation. I kept replaying that later on. What if I had stuck up for myself? And that's when the shame comes in, regret at not making a political stand. I have a catalogue of such incidents in my head and a mental map of Sydney where I'm wary of visibly straying outside the box of normality. Actually, anywhere I am in Sydney, any time of the year. I often bring a change of clothes when I dress up going out to a party out of fear. And so the wash of rainbows across Sydney doesn't tell the whole story. It washes over the hate that still exists, and my experiences are not the hardest ones. I can pass, I can put on a hoodie and blend in, but others refuse to fit in, heroes to my mind, and they get punished every single day for it. And social media is, of course, just a conduit for the negative attitudes out there. Indeed, it makes it exceedingly easy to angry react to people who you've never met. It's, in some ways, a polarizing echo chamber for everyone. Have a look at some of these screenshots of posts put up by the Stockland Mall, Coles, and the Sardis City Casino. A very valid point is that Pride has been commercialized. There's the pink dollar, of course, but also well-meaning corporations who just want to signal their progressiveness by putting rainbows up. But from instances of discrimination that I experience from time to time, I appreciate this signaling and tend to emphasize the genuine well-meaningness of these gestures. And certainly they're more preferable to having a thong held up in anger at you. In seriousness, business and corporations played a key role in broadening the support for marriage equality that passed in 2017. They were ahead of the government at the time, and they had a role in getting the public and politicians over the line. Offline, in addition to the everyday symbolic and physical violence that my experiences allude to, there were cases of organized anti-LGBT protests during WorldPride. This is a protest outside of Manly Library in late February around the Drag Queen Storytime event, where a drag queen read storybooks to children accompanied by an adult. Protesters held up signs like "Drag queens are not for kids," while counter-protesters held up signs like "Love is love." The Storytime event went ahead, and in response to the protests, the CEO of the council defended the event, saying, "This event is being hosted by a professional performer promoting a love of literacy through creative and positive life experiences. Drag queen storytimes have been successfully held in many places around Australia to the delight of children and their families." In another example, 30 unauthorized protesters from the Christian Lives Matter group marched down King Street, Newtown, many in black hoodies and masks, reciting the Lord's Prayer and Hail Mary. Newtown, of course, is one of the centres of Queer Sydney, and this action was intended to intimidate. So between the citywide rainbows and these pockets of anti-queer sentiment, where does this leave us? Overall, I actually think it's a rosy picture. While not negating that these incidents occur and are felt unequally by some in the queer community, the sheer breadth of positive feeling overwhelms these pockets of hate. But when that hate does show itself, whether in person or online, it stings and it leaves a lasting mark. I can tell you that for many queer people, we carry around an archive of pain within us. So this is a good point to discuss an exhibition that I worked on, Absolutely Queer, at the Powerhouse Museum. After an overview of the exhibition and its development, I'll discuss some isolated complaints that we received among the overwhelmingly positive feedback. The exhibition name is partly an homage to the groundbreaking exhibition Absolutely Mardi Gras, which opened at the Powerhouse in 1996, one of the first major queer exhibitions that opened at a large public museum in Australia. Since then, the Powerhouse has developed a nationally significant LGBTQIA+ collection, including Mardi Gras costumes, the Australian AIDS Memorial quilt, and archives relating to HIV, AIDS, and partying in the 80s and 90s. Many of the major cultural institutions in Sydney had specific exhibitions and programming coinciding with WorldPride, including the Art Gallery of New South Wales, the State Library, Carriage Works, and the Powerhouse Museum. The Powerhouse has a long history of engagement with Sydney's queer community and saw WorldPride as an opportunity to continue this legacy, to develop the collection, and importantly, to expand the narrative we were telling about the queer community. So how we put together the exhibition was equally important. There are 2 queer-identified curators on the team, including myself and Roger Leong, and all the curators are queer allies. Among the wider exhibition team, and indeed the Powerhouse, let's just say that we're fabulously overrepresented. Queer allies have cared for our history at the Powerhouse, something to be honoured, but self-representation is also a very powerful thing. To this end, we also had an internal LGBTQIA+ committee that was a key sounding board for messages and contacts. I'm really proud of the result, Absolutely Queer, which we developed in a quite powerhouse way. So the exhibition celebrates queer creativity in Sydney through the lens of 9 different groups of queer creatives. So as well as telling the story of these creatives, we are telling a larger story about queer Sydney and its history. It's quite powerhouse in that it links to our disciplinary areas and also emerging areas of interest, including video game development, cartooning, performance art, drag performance, fashion, costume design, and jewelry making. On this slide are 3 of the 9 installations. In the center is the Chapel of Love that celebrates the love between Nikita Majajas and DJ Charlie Villas. Their wedding suits are displayed in the middle of the space with Nikita's acrylic jewelry made under her brand Doodad and Fandango against the walls. So the installation speaks to their creative fields, but also tells the story of marriage equality. Nikita used to think that marriage was just a piece of paper, but when she got married to Charlie in 2019, she came to fully realize the power of equality. On the left is a display of Mardi Gras costumes made by the El Salvadorian Australian costume designer Renee Rivas, which are now part of the Powerhouse collection. Renee came to Australia in the early 1980s as a refugee fleeing the civil war in El Salvador. In the mid-1980s, he was introduced to the Mardi Gras workshop by Peter Tully, who's perhaps the most influential creative involved in Mardi Gras. From the community spirit of sharing that he encountered, he learned his techniques of creating spectacular but also very wearable costumes, turning yoga mats, brooms, and commonplace items found in discount and hardware stores into these fabulous costumes. Renee infuses into his costumes his Latin American heritage, and the donation of his costumes really broadens the aesthetic and cultural diversity of the Mardi Gras costume collection. The image to the right is the display celebrating the life and work of Nori. They are known for their activism, which has led to the High Court to rule that they are a non-binary person, ordering the New South Wales Registry of Births, Deaths and Marriages to issue a certificate to that effect. Nori is also known for riding around the inner west on their bubble bike. We've actually acquired this bike and we've paid for a replacement bike, which Nori duly turned into Bubble Bike 2.0. Nori is also a cartoonist for the South Sydney Herald, and the opposite side of this display shows their cartoons over the decades, as well as a billboard of press clippings from their prolific activism. Transgender inclusion is something that all cultural institutions, up until recently, have neglected. Telling Nori's story front and center is a really important thing to signal that trans visibility matters to us. So the feedback to the exhibition to date has been overwhelmingly positive, but given that we have a general audience, we knew that questions would be asked about the prominence of queer visibility at the Powerhouse. So our first complaint happened before the exhibition opened, as the entrance arch was being installed. The entrance arch is a commission entitled Fabulous Acts of Protest and Celebration, made by the Beautiful and Useful Studio, a duo of gay queer men based in Beaconsfield who create large inflatable public artworks. While their works are colourful and engaging, they are embedded with deeper messages. The work is packed with signs, symbols, images, and words that are significant to the queer community. There are historical photos from gay liberation marches in the 1970s and 80s, signs from the AIDS activist group ACT UP, Silence is Death, which you see up there, as well as your usual love and rainbows. Kids love this, and they bound for the work, at great speed. And we're actually inviting all visitors to come and hug the works. Having done my PhD in museum studies here on queer inclusion in Australian museums and research controversy in museums generally, what you find is that a lot of controversial episodes in museums are sparked by seemingly innocuous things which snowball. The National Museum of Australia was embroiled in controversy in 2001 over what boiled down to displays that acknowledged massacres and braille outside that spelt out sorry, at a time when Howard refused to apologize to the stolen generations. The complaint that happened at the Powerhouse is not remotely in the same league as this, but the issue remains about whose history is worth showing, worth celebrating. The complaint around this arch was made by a couple who took issue with a quote on the side reading, "Dear Christians, some people are gay, get over it, love God." The quote is from the former minister of the Gosford Anglican Church, Father Rod Bauer, in 2013. He was administering the last rites to a dying gay man. The family asked for his partner to be excluded from the ceremony, which was troubling for Father Bauer. He put this quote up on the billboard outside of his church and received an outpouring of support. I believe the feedback from the couple who were offended was given verbally, so we weren't able to send a response, but it would have recounted the origins of the quote and the support of many churches and churchgoers for queer rights. The difficult task for museums with general, predominantly non-queer audiences is to promote discussions with visitors in a way that acknowledges where they're coming from, but while also continuing to support and celebrate queer visibility. I think that work such as this arch are really good at drawing people in, initially through its scale, placement, and design, and keeping them there with a message that makes an emotional appeal. No one work can do this alone, but many works in many places, every year, every school, every supermarket, every railroad crossing with a rainbow has a better chance. This is the power of the cultural sphere and the cultural sector. In response to the complaint, we installed a warning label at the entrance to the exhibition and made sure to brief our executive, front of house staff and volunteers on the quote in particular, but also the potentially sensitive material generally. This meant that across the organization, we were delivering consistent messages with full support, top down, and were as prepared as we could be for complaints. In the case of the drag queen storytime example I discussed earlier, it was amazing and crucial that the CEO of the council stepped in backing the program. The Powerhouse warning label read, "This exhibition contains nudity, religious references, sexual references, themes of death, and explicit language," which is pretty typical. Warning labels are a long-standing research interest of mine. Whenever I see an interesting one, especially for a queer exhibition, I take a photo. The question is, should you have one and what is its purpose? The exhibition team took a wait-and-see approach to the warning label. We were hoping that we wouldn't need one, but reconsidered after the first complaint. The theory is that visitors can make an informed decision about what they're seeing, and if they don't want to see, say, nudity, they can make that choice. In practice, warning labels are easy to miss. We're so used to them, for example, through film and television, that we take no notice of them. And the open-plan nature of many museums and galleries mean that an exhibition content cannot be isolated before one sees the warning. The most legally watertight warning would see an exhibition behind a closed door, a curtain. There would be someone at the entrance explaining to all potential visitors what they're likely to see. But of course, this is improbable. A warning label then is partly a device to protect the institution so that they can say, well, we warned you. With my queer theory hat on and my heteronormativity sensing antennas turned up, I could take issue with each element of the standard warning label. Nudity? So a male chest is acceptable. Okay, well, how about a trans male chest? Wait, isn't there already nudity in this gallery that doesn't carry a warning? The point is that nudity is unequally policed, and that the one-sentence warning is not enough detail to address all the assumptions that will be applied to it. Paul Yor is one of Australia's most controversial artists. He uses collages of found objects and applique quilts to really queer and subversive ends. In 2013, police removed seven images of boys' faces that were superimposed on adult male bodies after a complaint from a member of the public. For this collage, he was charged with possessing child pornography, charges which were later dismissed. The judge was especially critical of the police physically removing the images from the work with a Stanley knife and ordered them to pay Yor's legal costs. It was a critical moment for censorship in the art world. For WorldPride, Carriage Works presented Paul Yor's work, Word Made Flesh, which was originally shown at the Australian Centre for Contemporary Art in Melbourne last year. I loved this exhibition for its dirty, queer visual meanings. He's anti-normative, anti-national, anti-corporate, pro-filth, pro-camp, pro-colour. I will admit it's not for children, but perhaps that's something about all these dildos that you see in there. But the warning label is actually very pedestrian. It's buried in small font on a sign that you could easily walk by. It reads, "This exhibition contains content of sensitive nature and is sensory stimulating. Viewer discretion advised." I think this is so general as to be meaningless. Does it really prepare you to see a dildo on a mannequin that says, "Lest we faggot"? I don't think it does. Let's look at an example of a great sign, one that is not legalistic but is personal, that is prominently placed, that is a content warning that is also written from the perspective of the queer community. It was at the entrance to the Pride Revolution exhibition at the State Library of New South Wales, which we see at the right of the entrance. Granted, it's quite easy to signpost an exhibition with a single entry. It reads, "Take care of yourself. This exhibition is about love and celebration. It's also about the difficult times, grief, prejudice, violence, and the fight for change. It's about our bodies, dressed and undressed, and what we choose to do with them. It shows how language was used and how far we have come. If you think it might be too much for you or your kids, that's okay. Take care of yourself. Love, the Pride Revolution team." This is brilliant on a number of levels. It starts from the position of caring, take care of yourself. It gives a content warning to both queer and non-queer people of the violence inflicted on queers through time. It gives a warning about nudity, but prefaces that with a statement about agency. It's about our bodies and what we choose to do with them. It gives a language warning and then gives you a choice to see the exhibition, not specifying an age rating or implying that you may be comfortable with having your kids in there. And it ends with a statement about love. So it's doing a lot quite a bit in a single paragraph. I really hope to see more statements like this that don't fit within the standard template of content warnings. If I had to fault this sign, it would be because it requires something that is impossible. You have to see content first before you can decide if it's too much for you. But then again, this is the impossibility of all warning signs. An incident that I witnessed when I visited undermines the beauty of the statement, however. A security guard went up to an adult with a child and said, "This exhibition is not for children," and they promptly left. I wonder if they would have left of their own accord if they weren't confronted like this. Perhaps they would have taken something profound from the exhibition, which I certainly did. What if either of them was queer? What connection might they have made with queer generations past? So I now have the privilege of taking you through a whirlwind tour of some of the notable exhibitions among the 21 WorldPride exhibitions that I went to. I wish I could discuss at length all of them. They're all amazing, but I've just selected a few here. Along the way, I'll give you a brief description of each, pick out some interesting aspects, and draw some points of connection and contrast. I've already spoken about Paul Yor's Word Made Flesh, and at Carriage Works, and Absolutely Queer at the Powerhouse, so I'll skip those. First of all, where were they? As you can see from this map of all the venues, they're all within 5 kilometres of the city centre, with the exception of Campbelltown Arts Centre in the far bottom left, which is around a 60-kilometre drive southwest of the city. Removing Campbelltown Arts Centre leaves these venues, which, as you can see, are concentrated within the city centre and the inner east, with a few exhibitions scattered in the inner west and inner south. This accords with longitudinal surveys of queer exhibitions in Sydney and Australia, which agree that queer exhibitions tend to happen in inner city areas, most frequently in Sydney and Melbourne. Of the exhibitions, I would say 6 are hosted by major public institutions, which I've shaded in pink. My categories are up for debate, by the way, but the broad picture remains. An additional 5 receive most of their money from government sources, shaded in green. 4 venues are community galleries or artist-run initiatives, shaded in yellow. And 6 are in non-museum/gallery spaces, including the QVB, Green Park, Bandstand, Paddington Reservoir Gardens, projections on Hyde Park Barracks, and the lobby areas of UTS. It was a diverse suite of exhibitions in a variety of venues that came together in what I must say was an electrifying program overall. The Party is a medium-sized exhibition taking up the ground floor of UNSW Galleries in Paddington. It celebrates LGBTQIA+ partying in Sydney between the years 1973 and 2002, including such parties as the influential RAT, or Recreational Arts Team parties, Mardi Gras, Sleazeball, Sweatbox, and Inquisition. A lot of the material is archival, including documentation, ephemera, photography, and videos, with some clothing and outfits included as well. This is on till the 23rd of April, and I highly recommend that you see it, as it's a great example of a highly engaging exhibition that draws on archival material. I've included an excerpt from the introductory panel, which refers to another exhibition during WorldPride. So I've put a red box over it, called Eulogy for the Dyke Bar, an installation that recreates the atmosphere of bygone lesbian bars. It's one of the identified spaces that I really wanted to see, but I didn't out of respect. I love how the text asks people to self-include/exclude in a sensitive way, reading, "The bar is open to anyone who has identified with the term dyke or an experience of feminine spectrum queerness in the past or present, or perhaps future, and or feels an affiliation or allyship with dyke culture." This statement has a level of care and thoughtfulness that we saw with the Pride Revolution sign. Arguably, I could have attended under the allyship category, but the idea that some people might think twice about my presence is enough to make me keep a distance. Bloodlines was an incredible multiform exhibition at Carriage Works that brought together costumes, textile, photography, and music by the Indigenous performance/visual artist, the Huxleys. It honours legendary queer artists who were lost to HIV/AIDS in the 80s and 90s. A quilt, which is at the centre of the exhibition, is in the style of AIDS memorial quilts, where each panel, made by family, friends, lovers, are stitched together into a quilt, reflecting the combined enormity of loss. Pictured are a couple of panels for queer Australian artists, including Peter Tully, David McDermott, and Lee Bowery. Large photographs surround the room show the Huxleys in playful photo shoots that take inspiration from the artists on the quilt panel. And there is a music video featuring the duo, which is a beautiful tribute to fallen queers past. I pulled out a small section. Still young and tender, just want to feel your gender. Snatched too fast by the gods, still fucking queer against the odds. This was, to me, perhaps the most affecting exhibition of the program, and it left me a bit teary. I love that the Huxleys, I love the appreciation that the Huxleys feel for their queer ancestors. It was really palpable. And it made me remember that I have kin outside of traditional family structures. Enthroned, honouring Pride royalty, was a display at the Queen Victoria Building. True to its name, it honoured, quote, the real queens, kings, icons, activists, and change makers who helped to make Australian Pride what it is today. A banner over the QVB entrance sign changed the name from the Queen Victoria to the Queen Alex Building, after Alex Greenwich, and the Queen Felicia Building, after the queer artist Felicia Fox. Each of the honorees had a large banner taking over several floors of the central atrium of the building, and there were interpretive panels and photographs that spoke to their contribution to the queer community. I put the QVB in the non-museum gallery venue category, not to denigrate them. Actually, I think that they might have a greater impact than exhibitions in museums and galleries, which have a limited audience. Shopping malls and streetscapes where rainbows are placed that I discussed previously have a far greater reach. Pride Revolution at the State Library of New South Wales is extraordinary. It's on till July, so you definitely have to see it. It's the most ambitious exhibition put on during WorldPride, telling 20 stories of queer history through the state's library and archive collections. There is a great amount of depth to each story, owing to the copious amounts of text in the exhibition. In terms of sheer information, it's rather overwhelming. But it encourages you to pick and choose your stories, punctuated by engaging audiovisual and photographic material. I'll just mention one of these stories that you might not know about. Did you know that the first female state librarian, Ida Leeson, is who we, with contemporary eyes, would call a lesbian? She lived with her partner, Florence Birch, as one of the first residents of Castle Crag, integral to the community when Marion Marnie and Walter Burley Griffin resided there. It's a really fascinating story. The State Library has really embraced WorldPride as an opportunity to unearth stories from their own collection and to develop the collection through new acquisitions. They've started a really innovative project called Pride Line, where participants from their phones or the photo booth pictured in the bottom right can call the line to record their stories, which is then added to the permanent collection. And they're keeping everything, by the way. I went to a talk where they're like, yeah, we welcome like prejudice because, you know, they're going to be in the archive forever. The children can look them up and judge them from the passage of time. To me, it recognizes that telephones have been the source of joy and anxiety for queers. It's a point of connection. It's a place where you reached out to helplines. It's a place where you used to come out to your parents after you moved to the city. And now it's a place to share your story. A bit of a plug for the Powerhouse. We're also collecting around WorldPride, updating our nationally significant queer collection. I was on the ground during Fair Day collecting, have been making a lot of connections with a view to donations, and have my eye on a number of Mardi Gras outfits. It was really encouraging to me the amount of Indigenous inclusion in the WorldPride exhibition program. Indeed, the festival had indigeneity at its core. The amazing visual branding across the festival was produced by the Indigenous arts agency Noongar Creative, and the Indigenous artist and creative producer Ben Grates was one of the festival directors. You can see him in the center image in his drag persona, Miscellaneous. Starting in the top left are projection works by the artist Dylan Mooney at Hyde Park Barracks, taking over an early site of colonial power and violence. In the top right is a view of the exhibition Linger-Talk at the artist-run initiative Cement Fondue, which explored how queer Indigenous artists use encoded, private, or anecdotal languages to reveal and conceal. In the bottom left, is the exhibition Baya Nagara Bunga, Speak, Listen, Make, which was shown at the Bumali Gallery in Leichhardt. Bumali has been putting on Mardi Gras shows for many years and is an important cultural space for queer Indigenous art. And finally, on the bottom right is an image from one of the stories that's being told in the Pride Revolution exhibition at the State Library. That of the Indigenous artist Malcolm Cole, who is famous for reenacting the arrival of the First Fleet as a black James Cook in the 1988 Mardi Gras parade. A boat of black sailors was pulled by a white man in what is the first Aboriginal float in the parade. It's important for major public cultural institutions to tell these stories, not leaving it to community galleries, private galleries, and artist collectives. So I want to focus on one Indigenous exhibition, which was perhaps the most extraordinary. Actually, I'm going to call it. It was the most extraordinary exhibition of the 21 that I saw, Embracing Shadows by Carla Dickens, showing 30 years of the Wiradjuri artist's work. I really can't do justice to this exhibition without you seeing it. I can't do justice to it in 100 images. So I'm just going to pull out some vignettes that show her artistic style, which I might describe as subversive visual/material puns that mediate on female identity and racial injustice. Take this work, for example, a series of clocks. On one side are brown babies with an infinity sign on their head. On the back are skull and crossbones with the labels relentless, non-stop, continual. The meaning is clear. Counterposed to Indigenous deep time, deep and cyclical time which nourishes, is deathly Western progress, linear, relentless, non-stop, continual. As a former Bachelor of Arts student at this university, my semiotic brain was in overdrive. Just look at this kangaroo, an approximation of nature with its creepy snarl branded as native. These straitjackets on loan from the Powerhouse, overlaid with Aboriginalia. The control and policing of Indigenous women's sexuality, where the choices are between white dress purity, something that's unobtainable, especially for a queer artist, a queer woman, or being a whore as the other choice. A Union Jack with something like a sculp, with its string turned into a noose. This was a confronting and powerful exhibition. While it's fantastic to have exhibitions in greater metropolitan Sydney, I really wanted more people to see this one. The last two exhibitions I'll be discussing are produced by Qtopia, a group that is trying to establish a queer museum in Sydney, which would be the first in Australia and one of only several in the world, including the LGBT History Museum in San Francisco and the Schwules Museum in Berlin. Sydney has been here before. Sydney Pride Centre was established in 1989, part of whose mission was to celebrate LGBT history. In other places of the world, like New York City, queer community centres host exhibitions and do museum-like things. Also, in 2013, there was a pop-up museum on Oxford Street called the Mardi Gras Museum. And there were extended discussions afterwards between community, state, and local politicians about making it permanent. Qtopia is another iteration of the call for a permanent museum, and it's gotten further than any other. During the current election campaign, both the Labour Party and the Liberal Party have committed to installing Qtopia into the former Darlinghurst police station. The Labour Party have additionally announced that $3.85 million will be provided to establish the museum. It's a site with a dark history, as it contains the cells where the 78ers, that is, the revelers and protesters in the first Mardi Gras, were thrown into. They were bashed against the walls, leaving them blood-spattered. Given the support of both political parties and a $1 million donation from Lachlan and Sarah Murdoch, the museum is pretty much a done deal. It also has the patronage of Michael Kirby, Ita Buttrose, and Ian Roberts, the first rugby player in the world to come out as gay. Perhaps the most visible spokesperson, however, is David Paulson, an HIV/AIDS advocate who was made a member of the Order of Australia, who is seen on the right here. The first exhibition, the top two images, is billed as Qtopia's first location, the bandstand in the middle of Green Park, which is just across the road from St. Vincent's that had Australia's first AIDS ward, and is also next to the Wall, a place associated for decades with sex work. The exhibition included a diorama of a nightclub and costumes, portraits, and artworks by community members. The other exhibition, organised by Qtopia, called Ward 17 South, recreates the atmosphere of Australia's first AIDS ward at St. Vincent's Hospital. It featured a bed that was in the ward, a timeline of HIV/AIDS in Australia on the wall, and a video featuring an interview with David Paulson. The point of these exhibitions was less about creating a polished museum or gallery experience. What is interesting about them is that they are an expression of the community desire for self-representation in an ongoing organisation. This is in the same mould as hundreds of other local and community museums across Australia run by volunteers. I love them, all these museums, even if they print their labels on an office photocopier and have rooms of dusty things with little to no information. This is history from below in practice. I wish Qtopia the best of luck. I will say that the emphasis of the museum to date has been on telling the history of HIV/AIDS, a history that is personally affecting to me. The Carriage Works exhibition Bloodlines by the Huxleys at Carriage Works, which memorialised those who had been taken by AIDS, moved me to tears. The mission of Qtopia, stated on their About page, similarly dwells on this dark history and ties the museum to David Paulson's dream/goals/promise to tell the history of HIV/AIDS. There are additional statements about remembering persecution and to celebrating queer contributions to society. However, the narrative is clearly weighted towards the former subject. Clearly they're doing something right, as now they have the ear of whatever future government we're going to have. So what an incredible change that's happened over the course of several decades. And that's it. So I've covered a lot of ground. Rainbows everywhere, progress shark, signs of all descriptions, and surveyed exhibitions across the city. It's been a real privilege to throw open my diary and to share all my experiences with you. Thank you.